What's happening in biology? It's Mrs. Cozen again. I'm sure you are shocked that it's me. Not that it hasn't been me in the last 50,000 videos, but hey, welcome to another unit full of video notes. Fantastic. You guys are in your third unit. Woohoo! Made it through 2 already. And this is all about cells. It's going to be a fantastic unit. You guys, it's really fun. We're going to have a good time. And you guys probably already have quite a bit of background knowledge on it. So let's get started. If you guys want to make a big title for your for these unit notes, you can just call it Unit 3 Cells. And you can add Chapter 7 to that. There's some parts that we'll use with some extra chapters in the book, but most of it's in Chapter 7. All right, so just starting with objectives, you guys do not need to write these down, okay? These are just the state objectives that we're looking at you learning in this unit. Sorry. So first, we're going to look at how cells function in specific physical conditions. Like certain cells work at certain temperatures and pH. Like certain cells, like in your stomach. I know we talk about that one a lot because the pH in your stomach, you've got like a basic lining and the acid in your stomach. You've got specific cells that work really great in those very specific functions. Remember cell specialization from your first unit. Every cell has a special job, which means different cells can work in different places. We're going to be able to compare and contrast plant and animal cells, which you guys probably have a little bit of experience with already. We're going to be able to talk about all the different parts of a cells or the little organs or organelles and tell what they do. We're going to talk about how cell membranes work. That'll be the last part. All right, introduction. Remember, you guys, these are just the vocab words you're going to be seeing. You don't need to write them down right now. You're going to be writing them later. We're going to learn about 2 scientists, Robert Hooke and Leeuwenhoek, who are the first 2 scientists who really discovered cells. We're going to define what a cell is, what cell theory is, and then the big one, we're going to talk about the difference between little teeny tiny prokaryotes and bigger cells, eukaryotes. All right, starting with Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was a scientist who used an early microscope to look at cork. Think like cork board, like the board that we put our papers up and stuff in the front of the room. It's actually the bark of a tree. And when he looked at this cork, he saw these little teeny tiny square openings, and he saw them and he thought of cells like the cells that monks lived in. Think they were little rooms lined up all the same size, kind of almost like prison cells. So that's why he named them cells in the first place. But at this point, he didn't know or couldn't see all the organelles, little parts inside the cell. Okay. So what you need to know is that Hooke was the first person who named cells, and he found them by looking at cork. Anton van Leeuwenhoek is the next one, who first saw that cells were alive. He looked at pond water, saw little teeny tiny organisms swimming around, got a chance to see with a more advanced microscope some of the teeny tiny organelles and some of the little like flagella that they're swimming with. So he was the first one who really found out that cells were alive and were one of the basic parts that make up larger living things. All right, and definition of a cell: smallest unit that can be considered alive. There are little teeny tiny organisms that live as single cell. Think amoeba. Think those little teeny tiny creepy crawlies that you guys might come to mind when you're thinking of looking under a microscope, and we will hopefully actually see some of those later on in the lab. Those little teeny tiny single-celled organisms carry out all 8 characteristics of life all by themselves. And then we start to get multicellular organisms until you get all the way up to, say, like a human being. Okay, you have lots of different cells that have lots of different jobs, and then there's also living things that only consist of one cell, and that one cell does all 8 characteristics. The cell theory. My friends, you need to memorize these 3 things. You can memorize them in my words, you can shorten them up a little bit, it does not matter. You just need to remember that the cell theory consists of these 3 parts. All living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. And new cells can only be produced from existing cells. So we can't create cells out of nowhere. This has a little bit to do with that whole spontaneous generation idea. We can't get cells from nowhere. They have to come from already existing living cells. So make sure that you memorize these 3 things, please. And now we're going to talk about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Very, very important that you guys understand the difference between these, and we'll be looking at them in lab too. So prokaryotes, they're still cells. They're still single-celled organisms. They still carry out all the 8 characteristics of life, which is pretty amazing that a little tiny single-celled thing can do this. They're very, very small. They're very simple, so they don't carry out a lot of complex functions. They're very, very specific. They do not have a nucleus, which means they don't have a center where everything is that's kind of sending out signals to tell the rest of the cell what to do. What they have is sort of just a grouping of DNA. Remember, all living things have DNA. It almost looks like a big chunk of chewed up gum. And that DNA is the information that the cell uses to reproduce. And it reproduces asexually, which means that it basically kind of just clones itself. It just sort of, it replicates all the DNA, and then it's called binary fission, and it just splits off into two pieces. And now then you have two bacteria. Sometimes you would see small mutations in the DNA, and one bacteria would be different from another, but for the most part, it's just like cloning. One little bacteria makes a perfect little copy of itself. That's called asexual reproduction. Remember, that means no sex. There's no gender here. We don't have male and female bacteria. One bacteria can reproduce itself. And they always exist as just single-celled organisms. They're only one cell. And there are lots of different types. This is a really, really basic diagram for you, showing you what a bacteria consists of. Usually it has to have something to help it move. On this one, we have a flagellum, a little tail. Sometimes they'll have little teeny tiny hairs on the outside that will help them kind of crawl along. And then the inside, they've got that DNA. And they'll also have a membrane on the outside. They'll have a cell wall, which we usually only find in plants. In other animal cells, you won't find those. It just helps to give them some structure. And then the inside, they have these little things called ribosomes that make proteins. All living things have to make proteins. So even though it's single celled, doesn't have a nucleus, it's really simple, it's got to make proteins. So it's got these little ribosome things. Okay, so remember, prokaryotes, small, simple, single cell. Oh, the other thing I use to remember this is pro means no. Okay, I always think pro means no nucleus. So that's a little saying that I sometimes use to remember that one. And the big ones. My picture here doesn't look great. If you look back at the prokaryote one, it looks like it's almost the same size. Eukaryotic cells are actually way, 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 way bigger than prokaryotic cells, and they're much more complex. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. If you guys can see, there's all these little teeny tiny organelles, and each one has its own job, very specific job within the cell. So this makes a more complex cell that can do more complex things than, say, a bacteria. They can be single-celled, like an amoeba, and I'll show you guys later on when we get to lab what I mean when I say amoeba, if you're not sure. Or they can be 2 cells, or a million cells, or a huge multicellular organism like a human being or a cow or whatever, okay? So we can move from a single cell amoeba up into a really, really, really huge multicellular being. And then they have what we call membrane-bound organelles. What that means is there's all these little teeny tiny things that have their own job, and they have a membrane around them so that they don't dissolve inside the cell, basically. So they have all these little really specific organelles. If you look at this cell again, look at all these funky little things happening in here. You guys have probably learned a little bit about those in middle school. And if you look back at this prokaryote, we don't have any of those organelles in here. Very basic, very complex. Okay? So I always think pro means no nucleus, and then eukaryote, I think you are a eukaryote. Okay, I'm pointing at you right now, students. You are a eukaryote. Okay, just a little size comparison for you, and we are going to do a lab with this, and you're going to see the size comparison is even larger than this. Prokaryotes are super teeny, 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 tiny. They just have some cytoplasm on the inside, a membrane holding them together on the outside, and sometimes a cell wall, and no nucleus. And then in this eukaryotic cell, you can see all these different types of organelles that have different jobs within the cell. It's larger, more complex, can do a lot more things. Okay. And then ignore this one right here, you guys. This is animal and plant cells. Right here, if you can see this prokaryotic and eukaryotic one, just to compare and contrast, a little Venn diagram. They both have cell membranes. They both have ribosomes. They both can have what we call a cell wall, and if you're not sure what that is, we will explain it a little bit more later on. Eukaryotes have a nucleus. And then these are some of the other organelles that we're going to talk about later on in the notes. So these are the three things that are similar. If you guys want to write down, um, like list these three things in under both prokaryotes and eukaryotes, that'd be awesome. And that is it, you guys. Fantastic. So bringing that back together, remember pro means no nucleus, and eukaryotes, you, my human beings, you are eukaryote. Okay? So this was video 1 for unit 3, and you guys are all done. Thanks so much for listening to me. Bye.